I'm Natalie, 32, a corporate attorney who thought I was past family drama until that fateful dinner invitation. You know, the one where my parents suddenly wanted to reconnect after years of strained relationships. What I didn't expect was Mom placing her hand on a legal document and declaring I wouldn't inherit a penny.
Why?
Because I was too successful. The irony still burns. Family betrayal hits differently when it comes wrapped in a home-cooked meal. Stay with me as I share how I discovered my own worth wasn't tied to an inheritance. Before I begin my story, let me know where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe to join me on this journey of finding strength after family rejection. Growing up as the middle child between Rebecca and Michael was an exercise in invisibility. Our home in suburban Connecticut looked picture-perfect from the outside. The colonial with the white picket fence, my father Robert's successful accounting practice, my mother Margaret's impeccable hosting skills. But inside those walls, I learned early that the spotlight would never find me. When I brought home straight as in high school, my father would nod briefly before turning to praise Rebecca for getting a B+ in art class because she was really applying herself. When I won the state debate championship, my mother merely commented that the event had run late and dinner was cold. Meanwhile, Michael's third-place trophy in a local tennis tournament warranted a celebratory dinner at the fanciest restaurant in town. The pattern was undeniable, but unspoken. Rebecca, the eldest, was the artistic free spirit who needed encouragement. Michael, the baby of the family, was the charming athlete who could do no wrong. And me? I was just expected to achieve. My successes weren't celebrated. They were baseline expectations. Natalie always lands on her feet, my father would say, not as a compliment, but as justification for withholding the support my siblings received in abundance. When college application time came around, Rebecca received private art tutoring to build her portfolio. Michael got expensive sports camps to boost his chances for athletic scholarships. I got a pat on the shoulder and, "You'll figure it out. You always do." And I did figure it out. I worked 3 part-time jobs through undergrad at State University, maintaining my 4.0 GPA on my own. No family came to my graduation. Rebecca had an art show the same weekend that everyone simply couldn't miss. I celebrated alone with a box of grocery store cake and a promise to myself that I'd never need their validation again. Law school was more of the same. While my parents paid off Rebecca's student loans from her abandoned graphic design degree and funded Michael's finding himself year in Europe, I took out loans and worked as a research assistant to make ends meet. Every holiday visit home, I'd listen to stories about how my siblings were really close to making it big with their latest ventures, all bankrolled by my parents. Rebecca had cycled through 4 different business ideas in 5 years, a boutique that closed after 8 months, an online craft store that never turned a profit, a life coaching practice that attracted precisely 3 clients, and now a revolutionary app idea that my father had invested in without even seeing a business plan. Michael, for his part, had a talent for living luxuriously while technically being between opportunities. His downtown loft, designer wardrobe, and frequent vacations were all courtesy of loans from my parents that everyone knew would never be repaid. Meanwhile, I had clawed my way into Patterson and Wilcox, one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in Boston. I paid off my student loans through brutal hours and strategic career moves. I bought my own condo. I built an emergency fund. I did everything right, everything responsible. And for what? To be the family afterthought. Our relationship settled into a predictable pattern. Obligatory calls on birthdays and major holidays, stilted conversations about the weather and local sports teams, and the occasional group text that usually went unanswered when I responded. I kept showing up, sending thoughtful gifts, remembering important dates, playing the role of dutiful daughter while accepting that the emotional investment would never be reciprocated. So when my mother called last Tuesday with an unusual warmth in her voice, I allowed myself a dangerous flicker of hope. "Natalie, honey, your father and I were thinking it would be lovely to have a family dinner this Friday. It's been too long since we've all been together." "All of us?" I asked, already knowing Rebecca and Michael would be included, but needing to confirm. "Yes, everyone." Rebecca and Thomas, Michael and Jessica. And you, of course. My mother's voice had that bright, overly cheerful quality that usually meant she wanted something. Is there a special occasion? I asked. Does a mother need a special reason to want her family together? She replied, the familiar guilt-inducing tone creeping in. I agreed to come, then spent an embarrassing amount of time shopping for the perfect bottle of wine and a bouquet of my mother's favorite lilies. I even splurged on a cashmere scarf for her and golf accessories for my father. Looking back, the desperation in those gestures makes me cringe. My best friend Sarah watched me prepare with thinly veiled concern. Just don't expect too much, she warned gently over coffee the morning before the dinner. I know you want this to be some big reconciliation, but I'm not expecting anything. I lied, even as I mentally rehearsed witty anecdotes about work that might finally make my father proud. It's just dinner. But as I hung up my suit that night, laying out jewelry and planning my outfit with the care of someone preparing for a crucial court appearance, I knew Sarah was right. Despite everything, I was still that little girl desperate for her parents to look up and really see her just once. The evening of the dinner, I arrived precisely on time, another habit born from years of trying to be perfect. The familiar colonial looked exactly as it always had, down to the slightly crooked mailbox I'd accidentally backed into when learning to drive 15 years ago. Some things never changed. My mother answered the door with an enthusiastic greeting that immediately put me on guard. Margaret Carter did not do enthusiasm unless social appearances demanded it. Natalie, look at you, so professional in that lovely suit. Come in, come in. Everyone's just getting settled. The house smelled of pot roast and fresh bread, my father's favorites. Another red flag. This was a production, not a casual family dinner. In the living room, my father was already settled in his usual armchair, nursing a scotch and looking uncomfortable in a dress shirt. He nodded at me with what passed for affection in our household. Natalie. Busy at the firm, I imagine? Always. I replied with the practiced smile I reserved for difficult clients. How are the golf games going? Before he could answer, the door burst open and Michael swaggered in with Jessica, his latest girlfriend, a willowy blonde with expensive highlights and a handbag that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Behind them came Rebecca and her husband Thomas, she in bohemian layers despite the summer heat, he looking vaguely apologetic as always. The golden boy has arrived, Michael announced, making a beeline for the bar cart. Sorry we're late. Traffic was a nightmare. Rebecca drifted over to air-kiss my cheeks. Natalie, you look corporate, she said, somehow making it sound like an insult. How's the soul-crushing legal world treating you? Dinner proceeded with the usual dynamics, Michael dominating the conversation with exaggerated stories about his latest business connections, Rebecca interjecting with observations about the universe's energy and her creative process, and me answering direct questions politely while being interrupted mid-sentence. My parents beamed at my siblings, laughed too hard at their jokes, and occasionally remembered I was there. The first real sign that something was off came during the appetizer course. My father kept clearing his throat and glancing at my mother, who would shake her head slightly as if to say, not yet. Rebecca and Michael exchanged looks that could only be described as smug, while their partners studied their plates with sudden interest. By the main course, the tension was thick enough to cut with the butter knife I was clutching too tightly. When my father announced he needed to discuss important family business, I wasn't entirely surprised, just resigned. Your mother and I, he began, setting down his fork with deliberate care, have been doing some estate planning. My mother rose and disappeared into his office, returning with a leather portfolio embossed with the logo of my father's longtime attorney. We've been thinking very carefully about the future, she continued, resuming her seat and spreading a napkin across her lap with precision. About what's fair and what makes sense for everyone. I took a long sip of wine, steeling myself. Whatever was coming, it wouldn't be good. Rebecca and Michael have always needed a bit more support, my father said, as if this was breaking news rather than the defining feature of our family dynamic. And as we look toward retirement, we want to ensure they're provided for. Rebecca sniffled dramatically. Dad, you don't have to worry about us. Of course we do, my mother insisted, patting Rebecca's hand. That's what parents are for. I stayed silent, watching this performance with the detached interest of someone observing an unfamiliar cultural ritual. Natalie, my father finally turned to me. You've always been so independent. So capable. You've built a wonderful career and we're very— He paused, searching for a word that wouldn't come naturally. Proud of what you've accomplished on your own. The unspoken but hung in the air between us. My mother opened the portfolio and removed a document. Their will, I realized with a sinking feeling. We've decided to leave the house and the majority of our assets to Rebecca and Michael, she stated matter-of-factly. They still have so many dreams to fulfill, businesses to build. And you, well, you've already made it. You don't need our help. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, the explanation, the qualifier. There was none. We thought you should hear it from us directly, my father added, as if this was a courtesy rather than a final twist of the knife they'd been turning in my heart since childhood. So there are no surprises later. Michael had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, though the effect was ruined by his poorly suppressed smile. Rebecca was already babbling about the artist retreat she could finally build on the property after they inherited, speaking of my parents in the past tense while they sat breathing across the table. I remained perfectly still, the sounds around me fading as I processed what was happening. This wasn't just about money or property. This was the culmination of a lifetime of messages. You don't matter as much. Your feelings don't count. Your place in this family is conditional. That's when my mother placed her manicured hand directly on the will, leaned forward, and delivered the line that would change everything between us forever. You won't get a single cent, she said, looking me straight in the eye with a finality that suggested this was somehow doing me a favor. We know you understand. Time seemed to slow down. I could hear the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the clink of Jessica's fork against china, the soft exhale of Thomas's uncomfortable sigh. Something inside me, something that had been bending and accommodating and making excuses for 32 years, finally broke clean. I set down my fork and knife with deliberate care, folded my napkin, and placed it beside my half-eaten roast. All right, I said, a smile forming that felt foreign on my face. Then don't expect a single cent from me either. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor in the sudden silence. Natalie, don't be dramatic, my mother started, but I was already walking away, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. I drove home in a fog, hands shaking on the steering wheel, vision blurring with unshed tears. This wasn't just about money. This was the confirmation of what I'd always suspected but never wanted to believe. In the story of my family, I was never meant to be more than a supporting character in my siblings' narratives. The shock hit me in waves as I pulled into my parking garage. My throat constricted, my chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't remember how to unbuckle my seatbelt. With trembling fingers, I called Sarah. They invited me to dinner to tell me I'm not in their will, I said when she answered, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. Not a reduced portion. Not a sentimental item. Nothing. Because I'm successful and don't need it. Oh, Nat, Sarah breathed. I'm coming over. No, I said quickly. I need to be alone right now. Even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure if they were true, but the thought of explaining, of rehashing the humiliation, was unbearable. That night stretched endlessly. I paced my condo, replaying every moment of the dinner, then spiraling back through childhood memories with new, painful clarity. The Christmas when Rebecca got a car and Michael got a ski trip while I received a planner because you're so organized. The time my father paid for Michael's rent for 6 months after he quit his job but lectured me about financial responsibility when I asked for help with a security deposit during law school. The way my mother always introduced Rebecca as my talented daughter and Michael as my charming son, but me as just Natalie. Sleep never came. Morning found me hollow-eyed and emptied out, staring at my reflection and wondering how I'd function at work. Somehow I showered, dressed, applied concealer to the dark circles, and made it to the office on autopilot. 3 days passed in a blur of motion without feeling. I drafted contracts, attended meetings, responded to emails, all while carrying a ball of ice in my chest that seemed to grow colder and heavier by the hour. On the 4th day, the numbness gave way to anger that roared through me like wildfire. They've been setting this up my entire life, I told Daniel, my boyfriend of 8 months, as we sat in my living room that evening. I'd finally broken down and told him everything, making me the outsider, training me to expect less. And now they've made it official. Daniel, a pediatric surgeon with his own complicated family history, listened without interrupting, one of the qualities that had drawn me to him from our first date. What hurts most, I continued, pacing now, unable to sit still with the fury coursing through me, is how they framed it as a compliment. Like I should be grateful they're punishing me for being responsible, for not taking handouts, for building something on my own while they bankrolled every whim my siblings ever had. Have you considered calling them? Daniel asked carefully. Telling them how you feel? I laughed, the sound sharp and unfamiliar. What would I say? Thanks for confirming what I've always suspected, that I'm not really part of the family. The anger carried me through the next week, giving me energy even as it consumed me. I snapped at paralegals, berated opposing counsel, and nearly made my assistant cry over a minor scheduling error. My work, usually meticulous, began to slip. I missed a filing deadline, something I'd never done in my career. Then the calls from my siblings started. Rebecca reached out first, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Natalie, I just wanted to make sure you're okay after dinner. Mom and Dad were worried you might have misunderstood their intentions. Misunderstood. I repeated. They literally told me I'm getting nothing because I don't need it. What's to misunderstand? They're just trying to be fair, Rebecca insisted. Michael and I haven't had your advantages. What advantages? I almost shouted. The advantage of paying my own way through school? The advantage of never having my accomplishments acknowledged? The advantage of being told I don't matter as much as you two? See, this is why they're concerned, she said, voice cooling. You've always had this chip on your shoulder. Maybe if you tried harder to earn their approval instead of being so cold and judgmental all the time. I hung up on her. Michael's call came the next day, full of forced joviality. Hey sis, about the will thing, don't sweat it. I'll slip you some cash when the time comes. We can work something out under the table. The condescension in his offer, as if he was doing me a favor by promising to share crumbs from a table I'd never been invited to, nearly broke me. I managed a terse, no thank you, before ending the call. Word spread through the extended family. Aunt Clara called to tell me I should be more understanding of my parents' position. Uncle Philip suggested I apologize for making a scene. Cousin Diane wanted to know if the rumors that I'd thrown a plate across the room were true. They weren't. As the anger began to fade, I found myself entering a strange bargaining phase. Maybe if I'd been warmer, more present. Maybe if I'd chosen a different career, one my father respected more than corporate law, which he'd always dismissed as helping the rich get richer. Maybe if I'd been more like Rebecca, artistic, emotional, needy, or more like Michael, charming, sociable, the life of every party. I found myself digging through boxes of childhood memorabilia, searching for evidence that there had been love there once. A Mother's Day card I'd made in 2nd grade. A faded photo of my father teaching me to ride a bike. Birthday cards signed with love, Mom and Dad, in my mother's neat handwriting. Had it all been obligation rather than affection? Had I imagined the moments of connection? Late one night, I actually drafted an email apologizing for my reaction at dinner, suggesting we start fresh, proposing regular family dinners where I could try harder to be the daughter they wanted. I saved it to drafts, thankfully, rather than sending it. Reading it in the harsh light of morning, I recognized the desperation in every word, the willingness to erase myself to earn a place at a table where I'd never truly be welcome. Instead, I made a different list. Ways I might change their minds. Sending expensive gifts. Inviting them to my condo for a reciprocal dinner. Offering legal services for their retirement planning. Each idea felt more hollow than the last, each one requiring me to pretend the dinner hadn't happened, to sweep the hurt under the rug where all our family's uncomfortable truths lived. The bargaining gave way to something darker as the third week after the dinner approached. I began to slip. The breaking point came during a client presentation I'd prepared for weeks. Midway through explaining a complex tax strategy, I simply stopped speaking. The words disappeared. The room of executives stared at me, waiting, but nothing came. My mind had gone completely blank. "Miss Carter," the CEO prompted after an uncomfortable silence. "The offshore holding structure you were describing?" I opened my mouth, closed it, then gathered my materials with shaking hands. "I'm sorry. I need to reschedule." I walked out of the conference room, past my bewildered colleagues, straight to my boss's office. "I need some time off," I said without preamble. Harold Pierce, founding partner and my mentor since I joined the firm, studied me over his reading glasses. "Sit down, Natalie." I did, suddenly exhausted beyond words. "You've never taken a sick day in 7 years," he observed. "Not even when you had that flu, and I personally told you to go home. What's happening?" The simple kindness in his question undid me. To my horror, I burst into tears, something I'd never done at work, something I'd prided myself on never doing at work. Harold silently passed me a box of tissues and waited until I could speak. "Family issues," I managed finally.
"I'm sorry."
"It's affecting my work." "Take 2 weeks," he said immediately. "And see someone. The firm insurance covers therapy, you know." I nodded, too drained to even feel embarrassment. The days that followed were the darkest I've ever experienced. I stopped answering calls or texts, even from Sarah and Daniel. I barely ate. Sleep came in fits and starts, nightmares jolting me awake at odd hours. I moved through my condo like a ghost, sometimes standing in rooms with no memory of why I'd entered them. One afternoon, I'd lost track of exactly which day it was. My doorbell rang. I ignored it at first, but the visitor was persistent. When I finally dragged myself to answer, I found an elegant older woman I hadn't seen in nearly 5 years. "Aunt Elaine," I said, confusion breaking through the fog in my brain. My father's sister surveyed me with sharp blue eyes, so like his, yet warmer. "Good heavens, Natalie. You look terrible." Somehow this blunt assessment, delivered without judgment, made me laugh for the first time in weeks. "Thanks. You want to come in?" Aunt Elaine had always been the family enigma. Wealthy from a marriage to an investment banker, childless by choice, living in Europe for most of my childhood. She appeared at occasional holidays with exotic gifts and inappropriate stories, much to my mother's dismay. "Sarah called me," she explained, setting her purse down on my kitchen counter. "She's worried sick about you." "They all are."
"They." "Sarah."
"Your young man, Daniel. Your assistant at work." The doorman downstairs, who was quite reluctant to let me up until I convinced him I was actually related to you. She put the kettle on without asking, moving around my kitchen with surprising familiarity. "I hear my brother and his wife have outdone themselves this time." I stiffened. "You know about the will?" Robert called to justify himself. She snorted delicately. "He always does when he knows he's behaved badly." As we settled with tea, Aunt Elaine revealed things about my family I'd never known. How my father had been treated similarly by his parents, favoring his sister, Elaine herself, over him. How he'd sworn he'd never repeat the pattern, yet had done exactly that. "Your mother enables it," Aunt Elaine said bluntly. "She comes from money, you know. Never had to work for anything. She doesn't value what you've built because she can't understand it. And my brother, he resents your independence because it reminds him of everything he compromised in himself." "That doesn't excuse cutting me out completely," I said, the hurt still raw. "Nothing excuses it," she agreed. "But understanding patterns can help break them." She reached for my hand. "You're the strong one, Natalie. You always have been. That's why they take you for granted, and it's why you'll be okay." After Aunt Elaine left, promising to stay in town for a few more days, I showered properly for the first time in days. I ate a real meal. I looked at my phone, responding to Sarah and Daniel's increasingly worried messages. Then, I did something I hadn't planned. I got in my car and drove to my parents' house. I wasn't sure what I expected, certainly not to find everyone gathered again, almost exactly as they had been 3 weeks before. My parents, Rebecca and Thomas, Michael and Jessica, all looking up in surprise when I walked in unannounced. "Natalie," my mother exclaimed, half rising from her chair. "We weren't expecting you." "Clearly," I said, taking in the scene. They were having dinner. Another family dinner to which I hadn't been invited. "We were just discussing some follow-up details about the estate planning," my father explained, looking uncomfortable. "Nothing that would interest you." "Actually," I said, finding a strange calm settling over me, "I think it might interest me very much." Rebecca shot our father a warning look. "Dad, maybe this isn't the time." "No, Rebecca, I think it's exactly the time," I countered, pulling out an empty chair and sitting down uninvited. "Please continue your discussion." An awkward silence descended. Michael fidgeted with his wine glass. Jessica examined her manicure. Thomas looked like he wanted to disappear. "Well," my mother finally said with forced brightness, "we were just talking about the vacation property in Vermont. Your father and I have decided to transfer ownership to Rebecca and Michael now, rather than waiting. For tax purposes." "I see." I nodded slowly. "The property I helped you find. The one I reviewed all the paperwork for, free of charge. The one where I paid for the new roof last year when you mentioned it was leaking." My parents exchanged startled glances. "You paid for the roof?" my father asked. "We thought the insurance covered it." "The insurance I helped you file a claim with?" "No, they denied it because the damage was classified as wear and tear, not storm damage. I covered the $23,000 because you mentioned being worried about your retirement savings." My mother's lips parted in surprise. "We had no idea." "There's a lot you have no idea about," I said evenly. "Like the fact that I've been paying for Mom's specialized medication since her insurance stopped covering it 3 years ago. Or that I set up and fund the maintenance service that keeps the yard looking nice. Or that when Michael's car was repossessed last year, I'm the one who paid off the loans so it wouldn't affect your credit since you'd co-signed." Michael had the grace to look ashamed. "Nat, I didn't know." "Of course you didn't. None of you did because I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because that's what family does, they support each other. Not just the ones who struggle, but all of them. Equally." My mother's face had gone pale. My father couldn't meet my eyes. "I never asked for special treatment," I continued, my voice steady despite the emotion churning inside me. "All I wanted was to be treated like I mattered as much as they do." I gestured toward my siblings. "We never meant to make you feel less important," my father began, but I cut him off. "Intentions don't matter. Actions do. And your actions have made it very clear where I stand." My mother reached for the portfolio, the same one from our previous dinner, and placed her hand on it. She looked me straight in the eye, her voice hardening. "This doesn't change anything, Natalie. The will stands as is. You won't get a single cent." The table fell silent. Even Rebecca and Michael looked uncomfortable now. I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. I smiled. Not the placating smile I'd worn my whole life to keep the peace, but a genuine one born of finally seeing the situation with complete clarity. "All right," I replied calmly. "Then don't expect a single cent from me either. Not for medication. Not for home repairs. Not for emergencies. Not for anything." I slowly set my fork and knife down on the table and stood up. "You've made your choice. Now I'm making mine." This time, when I walked out, I didn't look back. The drive home was different this time. No fog, no numbness, no desperate grief. Instead, I felt lighter, as if I'd set down a burden I'd been carrying for decades. The burden of hoping for acceptance that would never come. The burden of trying to earn love that should have been freely given. By the time I reached my condo, my phone was already buzzing with messages. I ignored them all except for Daniel's, asking if I was okay. "Better than okay," I texted back. "Free." The next morning, I woke with purpose for the first time in weeks. I called Sarah first, filling her in on everything that had happened. I'm proud of you, she said when I finished. It's about damn time you stood up for yourself. I couldn't have done it without Anna Lane, I admitted. Speaking of which, I should thank you for calling her. I didn't know what else to do, Sarah confessed. You were scaring me, Nat. I've never seen you like that. I've never felt like that, I acknowledged. But I'm back now. Different, but back. The calls from relatives started later that day. Surprisingly, many were supportive. Uncle James told me he'd always thought my parents' favoritism was disgraceful. Cousin Lisa shared that she'd gone through something similar with her own family. Even Grandma Ruth, my mother's mother, who rarely involved herself in family disputes, called to say she was disappointed in how I'd been treated. Of course, there were others who took my parents' side. Aunt Clara left a scathing voicemail about respecting one's elders. Uncle Philip suggested I was being materialistic. And my siblings, they were the most vicious of all. Rebecca's text message was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive guilt-tripping. Congratulations on destroying what little family harmony we had left. Mom hasn't stopped crying since your little performance. I hope you're satisfied. Michael went for a more direct attack. Way to make everything about you as usual. If you weren't such a cold, calculating robot, maybe Mom and Dad would actually want to include you. Their words stung, but the pain was different now, external rather than internal. It couldn't reach the core of me anymore. With Anna Lane's encouragement, I began setting firm boundaries. I blocked my siblings' numbers after their attacks escalated. I informed my parents via email that I would be taking a break from communication while I processed everything. I changed my emergency contact at work from my father to Daniel. Daniel, for his part, showed up in ways I hadn't expected. He listened without trying to fix the situation. He gave me space when I needed it but never disappeared. One evening, as we walked along the waterfront, I finally told him the full story of my childhood, not just the highlight reel of disappointments I'd shared before, but the daily, grinding reality of being the least favored child. I always sensed there was more, he said, squeezing my hand. Thank you for trusting me with this. I should have told you sooner, I admitted. I was ashamed. You have nothing to be ashamed of, he said fiercely. Nothing. At Sarah's suggestion, I joined a support group for adult children navigating difficult family relationships. The first meeting, I sat silently, just absorbing others' stories. By the third, I was sharing my own. The validation of hearing that wasn't okay and you deserved better from strangers who understood was surprisingly healing. I reconnected with Aunt Elaine properly, meeting for weekly lunches before she returned to Europe. She introduced me to cousins on my father's side I'd barely known, people who welcomed me without expectation or judgment. For the first time, I experienced what family could and should be, a source of support rather than pain. Professionally, I returned to work with a new perspective. In a candid conversation with Harold, I shared more about my family situation than I ever had before. I've been trying to prove my worth through achievement my entire life, I explained. It's made me an excellent lawyer, but not always a well-rounded person. Harold nodded thoughtfully. I suspected something was driving you beyond normal ambition. For what it's worth, Natalie, your work has always spoken for itself. You never needed to prove anything here. With my personal knowledge of estate planning now painfully enhanced, I found myself drawn to that area of law. Harold supported my interest, assigning me to more cases involving family trusts and inheritance disputes. Working with clients to create fair, thoughtful legacies for their children became unexpectedly meaningful. Through it all, my parents made sporadic attempts to reconnect, always on their terms, never acknowledging the harm they'd caused. My mother sent lavish flower arrangements to my office with cards saying simply, "Thinking of you." My father left voicemails about neutral topics like weather and local sports teams, as if our last conversation had never happened. I didn't respond to any of it. The most difficult was a package that arrived on my birthday, an expensive watch with a note in my mother's handwriting. Time heals all wounds. We miss you. The manipulation was so transparent it almost made me laugh. I donated the watch to a charity auction and sent them the receipt as my only response. Rebecca tried a different approach, sending a tearful email about how she just wanted her sister back, and didn't understand why I was punishing everyone. Michael attempted to ambush me outside my office one day, claiming he just happened to be in the neighborhood. I walked past him without a word. 6 months after the fateful dinner, I realized something remarkable. I was happy. Not perfect, not healed completely, but genuinely happy in a way I'd never been when trying to earn my family's approval. The constant background anxiety of wondering if I was enough had quieted. In its place was a growing certainty that I had always been enough. They just hadn't been able to see it. As the 6-month mark of my estrangement from my parents passed, my life had found a new rhythm. My relationship with Daniel had deepened. We were discussing moving in together when his lease ended in the spring. My friendship with Sarah and other friends I'd somewhat neglected during my work-focused years had blossomed with the time and energy I now invested in them. My work continued to fulfill me, especially as I developed my specialization in family estate planning. I'd begun working with a therapist, Dr. Eleanor, who specialized in family trauma. Our sessions often left me emotionally drained but clearer about the patterns that had shaped me. You developed hyperconfidence as a survival mechanism, she explained during one particularly insightful session. If you could be perfect, maybe they'd finally love you properly. But their inability to love you equally wasn't about your performance. It was about their limitations. I still catch myself doing it, I admitted. Taking on extra work to prove myself. Over-delivering. Never asking for help. Awareness is the first step, she reminded me. Now you can make conscious choices rather than reacting from old wounds. Those conscious choices led me to explore interests I'd never allowed myself time for before: a photography class, weekend hiking trips with Daniel, volunteer work at a legal aid clinic for low-income families. I discovered parts of myself that had nothing to do with achievement or validation, parts that simply brought joy. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, Anne-Elaine called from Paris. "Your parents have asked to meet with you," she said without preamble. "Through me, since you're not responding to them directly." My stomach tightened. Why? They didn't say exactly. But your father sounded different. Less defensive. More subdued. "I don't know, Elaine," I said, old wariness rising. "The last time they wanted to meet for no specific reason, it didn't go well for me." "I understand," she said. "And you absolutely should refuse if that feels right." I promised I'd pass along the request, not that I'd convince you. After consulting with Dr. Eleanor and discussing it at length with Daniel, I agreed to a meeting, with conditions. It would be at a neutral location, not their house. Anne-Elaine would be present. And at the first sign of manipulation or guilt-tripping, I would leave. We met at a private room in a downtown restaurant the following Saturday. When my parents arrived, I was struck by how much older they looked after just 6 months. My father, always robust and commanding, seemed diminished somehow. My mother's carefully maintained appearance showed signs of slipping, her roots showing, her makeup less precise. "Thank you for coming," my father began, his usual confidence absent. "We appreciate it. Elaine said you wanted to talk," I replied neutrally.
"I'm listening."
My mother twisted her napkin in her lap. "We've had some difficulties since you left." "Financial difficulties," my father clarified, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Your siblings have been demanding." I waited, saying nothing. "We didn't realize how much you were contributing," my mother continued when I didn't fill the silence. "The medication, the house maintenance, everything you mentioned." "And more that you didn't mention," my father added. "We've been going through our accounts, trying to understand where money has been going. There's so much you quietly took care of that we didn't even notice." "That wasn't why I did those things," I said evenly. "We know," my mother said quickly. "That's what makes it worse in a way. You helped because you cared, not because you wanted recognition." My father cleared his throat. "There's something else. I've been having some health issues. Heart problems." "Nothing immediately life-threatening," he hastened to add at my expression, "but it's made me think about things differently." "What things?" I asked. "Family. Legacy. What really matters." He looked down at his hands. "I've been so focused on helping Rebecca and Michael because they struggle. But I never stopped to ask why they continue to struggle despite all the help, or what message our constant rescuing was sending them. Or what message it sent me, I added quietly. Yes, he acknowledged, meeting my eyes for the first time. That too. My mother reached across the table, not quite touching me, but extending her hand. I've always been envious of you, Natalie. Your independence. Your confidence. I never had those things. The admission stunned me. You were envious of me? She nodded, tears welling. I didn't know how to relate to you. You were so different from me, from what I understood. So I focused on Rebecca and Michael because they needed me in ways I could comprehend. We're not asking for forgiveness, my father said. Not yet. We haven't earned that. We're just asking for a chance to try and do better. I studied them both, searching for signs of the manipulation I'd grown so accustomed to. What I saw instead were two flawed, aging people finally facing truths they'd avoided for decades. I can't just go back to how things were, I said carefully. Too much has happened. We don't want to go back, my mother surprised me by saying. Back wasn't working. We want to try something new, something better. Starting with the will, my father added. We're revising it. Equal shares for all three of you, as it always should have been. I shook my head. I don't care about the will anymore. That was never really the point. We know, he said, but it's a concrete way we can show we're serious about change. We talked for nearly 3 hours that day, covering ground we should have explored decades ago. There were no miracle cures, no instant reconciliations. But there was perhaps the beginning of a path forward, not to the past, but to something new we might build together. 1 year after the dinner that changed everything, I sat on my balcony with a journal Daniel had given me for this specific anniversary. To mark how far you've come, he'd said. The past year had been a journey of redefinition, of family, of success, of my own worth. As I watched the sunset paint the city skyline in gold and pink, I reflected on all that had changed. My relationship with my parents had been rebuilt slowly, brick by careful brick. We'd started with brief coffee meetings, then graduated to occasional dinners. I maintained clear boundaries about what I would and wouldn't discuss, what behaviors I would and wouldn't tolerate. They respected those boundaries for the most part, and when they slipped, I calmly reminded them rather than accommodating as I once would have. The difference, I wrote in my journal, is that I no longer need their approval to feel whole. I can love them without needing anything from them, which ironically makes it possible to accept what they're now willing to give. They had indeed revised their will as promised, though as I told them, that no longer mattered to me. What mattered was the effort to correct an injustice, to acknowledge that all their children deserved equal consideration. My relationship with my siblings remained complicated. Rebecca had initially refused to speak to me after our parents started taking my side, as she put it. Months of family therapy sessions had helped somewhat, though we would likely never be close. Michael had been more pragmatic, especially after our parents stopped funding his extravagant lifestyle and insisted he find steady employment. Our conversations remained superficial but cordial. Daniel and I had moved in together 3 months ago, transforming my one-star condo into a warm home filled with photographs, comfortable furniture, and the occasional clutter that comes with sharing a life. We were discussing marriage, not with urgent timelines, but as a natural evolution of what we'd built together. My career had taken an unexpected turn. While I remained at Patterson and Wilcox, I developed a specialty practice helping families navigate complex inheritance situations with fairness and transparency. I'd even published articles on preventing family estrangement through thoughtful estate planning, drawing carefully on my personal experience without revealing private details. Most profoundly, I'd found peace with my own story. The therapy work with Dr. Eleanor had helped me recognize that my worth had never been dependent on my parents' ability to see it. Their limitations had shaped my childhood, but didn't have to define my future. The inheritance that matters most, I wrote, isn't measured in dollars or property. It's the legacy of how we treat each other, the patterns we choose to break or perpetuate, the love we give freely rather than conditionally. The foundation I'd established with part of my savings, the Equal Worth Foundation, had begun helping young adults from difficult family situations fund their education and build independent lives. It was perhaps the most healing project of all, transforming my pain into purpose. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel joined me on the balcony with 2 glasses of wine. "Happy anniversary," he said, clinking his glass against mine. "Though that seems like the wrong word." I smiled. "Maybe commemoration is better." Marking a moment that was painful but ultimately transformative. "To transformation, then," he amended, taking my hand. Later that evening, as we prepared for a small gathering of friends and chosen family, I reflected on the final lesson of this journey. Family is both what we're born into and what we create. The people who gathered in our home that night, Sarah and her husband, Anne Elaine who'd flown, and especially colleagues who'd become friends, members of my support group, they were my family too, bound by choice rather than obligation. My parents had been invited but had declined, understanding that this celebration was about the new life I'd built. They'd sent flowers instead, with a card that simply read, "We're proud of you," without the qualifier that would once have followed. Proud of you for your accomplishments, your success, your achievements. Just proud of me, the person I was. That night, surrounded by laughter and genuine affection, I felt a sense of completion. Not because everything was perfect or because all wounds were healed, but because I'd found my way to a truth that had eluded me for so long. My value was intrinsic, not earned. It always had been.
So what about you?
Have you ever had to redefine your relationship with family or stand up for your worth? How did you find the courage to set boundaries when necessary? Your stories remind us that we're not alone in these struggles. Please share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of people supporting each other through life's challenging moments. Thank you for being here with me today, and remember, your worth isn't determined by others' ability to recognize it. It's yours, complete and unchangeable, from the very beginning.